All right, well, good to go. All right, well, hello everyone, and thank you for attending today's presentation on human trafficking in Alberta, and a big shout out to REACH for organizing this event and all the events in this Resource Connect series. So my name is Amanda Warnock, and I'm the education lead at ACT Alberta, designing and delivering anti-trafficking training in all types of industries, in all types of communities across Alberta. So a couple of things before we begin. So human trafficking is an egregious human rights abuse. And we know that talking about it, listening to personal stories from victims and survivors, reflecting back on our experience with maybe clients or loved ones, even random encounters with strangers, and perhaps even our own personal histories can be super hard for folks. So we'd like to recognize and acknowledge that. So please just check in with yourselves. If you're ever not okay, it's totally acceptable to take a break, get some air, grab a snack, whatever you need. And if you'd like, I will be here after for anyone who wants to debrief. Number two, we offer monthly human trafficking 101s, special topic webinars, and I think we actually have one on housing coming up this month for anyone interested. And we can book specialized trainings for service providers, for healthcare workers, for law enforcement, really anyone who might encounter a victim or survivor in a professional or personal capacity. So please connect with me if you'd like more information on those. And then number three, as mentioned, we have some resources on the back, so feel free to take whatever you need. But if you'd like a big stack to take back to your office, or if you'd like me to come by and visit with a big stack, please just connect with me and I'd be happy to deliver wherever you are. All right, so we're gonna begin with what is human trafficking, and then get into what does it look like, and then get into how can ACT Alberta help? So we're going to start with two stories. These characters are not real, rather they reflect accumulation of experiences that we often hear from victims and survivors of human trafficking. Their stories will be used for illustrative purposes only and will help guide us on the path to understanding what it is and what it isn't. All right, so meet Anna. So Anna is a first-generation Canadian whose family originates from Mexico. Although she was born and raised in Saskatoon, her family speaks primarily in Spanish, and Anna has difficulty feeling othered by her peers because of her and her family's strong cultural ties. She's been slowly distancing herself from her family, though, because she's been drinking more and more, and they dislike that. And she started to crash at her classmates' houses after parties more often than her own, and just to avoid arguments. Now that she's graduated from high school, Anna is looking for a new sense of structure and purpose as she figures out her goals and identity. Okay, now meet Dev. Dev is 24 and ambitious. He grew up in India with a loving family that was often short on resources. He has moved many times and often lived without the luxury he's desired. When he hears about an agency that can offer him a high salary and quality life as a construction worker in Canada, he starts to make arrangements. He tells his family that he will be able to support them, and hopefully one day they can all be together in Canada in a few years. Okay, so now that we've met our storytellers, let's talk about how we understand human trafficking. So perhaps it's best to start with a definition. So there are many different definitions used by different groups, but though we at ACT subscribe to the UN definition, which is also called the Palermo Protocol. So it states that human trafficking is the action of recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons by means of the threat or use of force or other forms of coercion, of abduction, fraud, of deception, of the abuse of power or position of vulnerability, or the giving or receiving of payments or benefits to achieve the consent of a person having control over another person for the purpose of exploitation. So that's really long and confusing. So more simply, human trafficking is the action of forcing, coercing, or deceiving an individual into exploitation. So that can be broken down further into something we call the action, means, and purpose model. So traffickers need to do something to their victim, which is the action, using methods to control them, which is the mean, for some intended reason of exploitation, which is the purpose. So there's a bunch of words in these circles, and you might be wondering what those mean. So those are the words from the previous slide loosely. The thing is, in order to meet the threshold of human trafficking, you need at least one in each bubble to count. So as long as there's one action word, one means word, and one purpose word, that meets the definition of human trafficking. So for example, a person might be transported using force for the purpose of forced labor, or a person might be recruited using abduction for the purpose of sexual exploitation. In general, though, traffickers undertake actions using means for the purpose of exploiting people. Okay, so we have a video. I don't know if it's going to work. Let's see. It explains it better.
It's time to dive into the model used to describe the elements of human trafficking. The action, means, purpose model. First up is action. This involves the step traffickers take to acquire their victims, involving the recruiting, harboring, transporting, providing, or obtaining of an individual. Next up is means. In our last video, we said human trafficking happens when a trafficker uses force, fraud, or coercion to exploit a person. These three things make up our element of means. Force is physical abuse or assault, sexual abuse or assault, or confinement. This means someone is physically forcing their victim into a trafficking situation. Force is the element most often portrayed in media and the news in regards to trafficking. That doesn't mean fraud and coercion are any less relevant or less harmful. Fraud is any intentional deception or misrepresentation used to benefit yourself or someone else. Examples include false promises of work or living conditions, withholding promised wages, or even a fraudulent "I love you." Coercion contains threats of harm to self or others, debt bondage, psychological manipulation, or document confiscation. A trafficker who uses coercion might threaten to hurt the victim's family, or the trafficker might convince the victim that the trafficker is the only family they have. Last but not least, purpose. The trafficker commits these crimes for the specific purpose of trafficking their victims. This includes either compelled labor or services or commercial sex acts. These purposes then result in the trafficker obtaining money and/or power due to their crimes. Now you know what trafficking is, how to define it apart from other crimes, and how it happens. Time to roll on and learn the final part of this lesson. Who is involved in human trafficking?
Okay, I hope you could hear that. I don't know how the sound worked, but it was a little bass heavy from where I am, but hopefully that made sense. Okay, so let's hear more from Anna. So Anna's transition out of high school was difficult for her. She drifted from her small friend group, and unsure of her goals, she picked up additional hours at her local convenience store. One day, a handsome customer chatted with her, and she enjoyed the feeling of connection. He started to return, and the conversations became longer and longer. Suddenly, Anna was excited to go to work in hopes that she might see him. Through school, Anna mostly kept to herself and was quite new to romantic relationships. So when this customer asked Anna to be his girlfriend, even though they'd never really touched or been on a date, she happily agreed. From that point, a whirlwind relationship started, with Anna spending all of her free time at his home, showered in gifts, compliments, and the new world of intimacy. Oh, sorry. I need to go back. There we go. Though when that shine faded, Anna was desperate to return to the high of being courted. He told her that he didn't believe him, that she loved him, but he would if she did him a favor. That night, Anna found another man in her bedroom. Things did not improve from here. Anna's boyfriend began to insist that she owed him for the cost of rent for the past few months and the cost of alcohol and drugs that she had been rapidly going through. More men came and went, and her boyfriend suddenly declared that they had to move to Edmonton to clear off some heat. Anna didn't want to move, but her boyfriend reminded her that she owed him money, and if he didn't go to Edmonton, that she would tell her parents, he would go to their parents for the debt and tell them about all the men she had been with. Okay, so looking at these bubbles, we can see things like an action of recruitment, transportation from Saskatoon to Edmonton, and a means of threats, coercion, fraud, and deception for the purpose of sexual exploitation. Okay, so Dev excitedly read pamphlets about his new adventure written in his native Hindi because his English is limited. He'd be coming to Canada on something called a temporary foreign worker permit, and he'd be sponsored by his new company. So his is a closed work permit, meaning that he would only be able to legally stay and work in Canada if he remained with that particular employer. Dev wasn't worried though, because he'd always thought of himself as a loyal worker and a hardworking person and a loyal worker. As a perk, he learned that the company would provide him with housing and 2 meals a day. So he said a bittersweet goodbye to his family and boarded the plane. After a long flight, Dev was tired, but he was shown his new arrangements in a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom home with 5 other men. Dev was pretty sure his boss didn't respond to those questions he asked because of the English barrier, but he'd try to find the right words and ask again tomorrow. In the morning, he was awoken at 5:30 a.m. and worked 12 hours with only a single 20-minute break. After 3 weeks, Dev began to lose hope as the cycle continued. Like his housemates, his passport was being held by his boss, and he knew that his work permit wouldn't let him work anywhere else, so he felt like he had to stay. Okay, so again, looking at these bubbles, we can see that there is an action of recruitment, harboring, and transportation from India to Edmonton, and a means of fraud and deception about his working conditions and living arrangements for the purpose of forced labor. So loosely, we know that there are many different types and reasons for exploitation, including sexual exploitation, forced labor that we've talked about already, but there's also forced organ removal, child soldiers, forced marriage, and illegal adoption, among others. That said, in Canada, we primarily see it for the purposes of forced labor and sexual exploitation, which we're going to be focusing on for the rest of today. And that's most of the work that we do at ACT, though we are able to work with clients of any other type, but we mostly see human trafficking for those 2 purposes. All right. Just to highlight that, in 2022, 55% of our cases were labor trafficking, 30% were sex trafficking, 8% were mixed types, and 7% were that other category. So a big reason why we have a lot more labor trafficking cases than you typically see, as there are other groups in Alberta that handle sex trafficking, but none that do labor trafficking. So we tend to get a lot more of those referrals, and then a lot more of the sex trafficking cases tend to be sent to the other service providers. And then for labor trafficking, the industries most represented in Alberta are domestic work, commercial cleaning services, agriculture, hotels and hospitality, restaurants and food services, construction and trades. And 100% of our labor trafficking cases are also cases involving foreign nationals. And that includes whether they're undocumented, on a temporary foreign worker permit, asylum seekers, international students, or persons on visitor or business visas. Okay, so now we're going to get into what does it look like? What kind of things can you be on the lookout as keen, observant community members or as service providers? So I like to say that where there is vulnerability, there's usually trafficking. So I've broken these down into the individual, relational, community, and societal factors that might build upon each other and intersect to add additional elements of risk. Not everyone who is trafficked will have these or exhibit these factors outwardly, but taken together, they might create opportunities for traffickers to swoop in and take advantage of vulnerable persons. So at the individual level, we have, oh, that went too fast. Let's see if this goes. Okay, at the individual level, we have things like recent migration, immigration status, especially those on a closed closed permit, persons in precarious housing situations, LGBTQ plus individuals, runaway or homeless youth, individuals engaging in substance use, mental health concerns, persons with disabilities, persons experiencing financial debt or hardship, and persons with past or current criminal activity. And then at the relational level, we have things like family dysfunction, experiences of abuse or neglect, experiences of sexual violence or intimate partner violence, peer influences, gang affiliation, child welfare involvement, and especially, as we talked about earlier, that transition from the child and family services to transitioning out of that is a particular time of vulnerability, and then just a lack of supporting systems. At the community level, we have things like poverty, isolation, cultural norms, lack of opportunities, underfunded services, and humanitarian emergencies. And then finally, at the societal level, we have these broader factors like systemic inequalities, colonialism, racial discrimination, gender discrimination, sexualization and objectification of youth and females, precarious labor systems, and just the lack of awareness and knowledge on what exactly trafficking is and isn't. Okay, so the indicators that we talk about today won't always point to trafficking. There are lots of reasons why these things might happen, but in combination though, they might have some cause for concern. And if you get like an unsettling feeling in your gut, like something isn't right here, that's time to perk up and maybe watch for other things. But loosely, some of the signs for trafficking can be broken into 4 main categories. So being controlled. So if they're unable to speak for themselves or offer seemingly scripted responses, and one of the ways we see this is the co-opting of language barriers. So a trafficker might insert them into a conversation to translate for the individual, but then instead manipulate the message to their own benefit. Or they might have limited or no control over their money, or their working conditions, or their schedule. There might be signs of isolation and or limited contact with support networks. Then we also have signs that they have no freedom to exit their situation. So if they are frequently accompanied by someone seemingly watching them, or like acting like a security guard, if they have no access to their identity documents, so their passport or driver's license, etc., to prevent escape. They might impose contracts or debts that the person might feel like they have to pay off through their labor or service in order for them to finally leave, something we call debt bondage. Signs of abuse, so they might have unexplained injuries with a lack of medical treatment, signs of physical and or sexual abuse, things like bruises, broken bones, that kind of stuff, and signs of inappropriate punishment. So where the person might do something like a little wrong, but the reaction from the trafficker is completely overblown and disproportionate to the situation. And then lastly, signs of fear or despondence. So if they appear unusually anxious, submissive, tense, nervous, or paranoid, if they express feelings of hopelessness, worthlessness, or lack of self-esteem, and if they seem uncomfortable talking to an authority figure, as this is usually paired with that punishment, and they're told that they'll get in trouble if they are found out, or especially if they're engaging in drug use or sex work or something, or are undocumented, there'll be those the ingrained threats that if you talk to an authority figure, you will get in trouble. So we have a few specific to each. Now I'm just looking at the time. How are we doing for, I didn't keep track of when we started. Okay, perfect. So we have a few specific to each. So this one's for labor trafficking, and we're gonna start with concerns around money. So if there's excessive wage deductions, especially deductions for food, shelter, transportation, immigration services, etc., on their paycheck, and they think they're getting this large paycheck, and then by the end of all those deductions, it's not a livable wage. And if they're not paid what they're promised or owed, or if they sign a contract in English and have limited English skills, so they sign away their rights to work for what they thought they agreed to, and if they're paid less than minimum wage or like under the table or something. Regarding freedoms, if they're unable to leave their workplace without their employer, they're always like shuttled around in a group. And it's not uncommon for employers to say, like, hey, you're here on the temporary foreign worker visa. And then they get here, oh, just kidding, you're actually here on a visitor visa and what you're doing is illegal. Do what I say or you will be deported. If there's unusually high security measures at their workplace, we've seen cameras, lots of cameras, but even cameras in the living accommodations, like that shouldn't be, if they experience threats or intimidation from their employer, like, I'll have you deported, I know where your family lives, you're stupid, you're lazy, etc. And if they depend on their employer for everything, like for transportation, for food, for translation, whatever, all of it, that's kind of a red flag. And then lastly is employment conditions. So if they lack basic training or certification needed for the job, and the employer dismisses that as, you know, it's okay, don't tell anybody, that kind of stuff. If there's no employment contract, so again, if they're working under the table with or without proper documentation, not to say that people working under the table are doing something inherently wrong, but that's just something that we see traffickers use to abuse people and exploit them. If there's a different job than advertised, so they get here, they think they're gonna work in construction, oh, that job's no longer available, here, can you clean my toilets instead? Or if they work excessively long or abnormal hours, if it doesn't match with the job description or expectations, they don't have breaks, they're not given the agreed upon benefits, no overtime pay, or no correct overtime pay or no overtime pay at all. And if they're put up in employer-provided accommodations, which are cramped and squalid with like many people, just unsanitary conditions that they're paying for out of their, paying an obscene amount for. And if there are poor or non-existent health and safety standards and equipment, and often these are the people who are most exposed to extremely harmful occupational hazards. So we might see folks, say in the agriculture sector, who are not given the proper PPE, who end up in the hospital with respiratory conditions because their employer just doesn't care. Okay, so we have a couple more for sex trafficking, and we like to make the distinction between signs of sex trafficking and signs of consensual sex work. So elements that portray us that they're being forced, coerced, or deceived to be into in their situation. So we have the same sort of categorization for that. So, oops, let's see if these, oh yeah, here we go. So we're gonna start with appearance and behavior. So if there's tattoos or branding indicating ownership, specifically with like a male's name, oh, sorry. Matching tattoos across multiple victims or gang tattoos, if they exhibit changes in their appearance or behavior, especially like body language, if there are unusual displays of wealth without known explanation, so like new jewelry, new phone, new shoes, all of that without the income to match, and if they might live or travel in a group with other women who might seem to not really know each other or speak the same language, but say we're sisters, we're friends, that kind of excuses. Next, we're gonna go to working conditions. So if they work long or excessive hours or are always available on demand 24/7, if they have little or no choice in the type of clients or location or activities or type of sex work, and if they have no choice in condom use. And lastly, evidence of control. So if they have a pimp or manager in the sex industry who takes a big cut or all of the money, they're made to engage in sex work or sexual servitude to help the relationship, to help the family, to help repay a debt. If they're frequently moved around to different cities, to different studios, different provinces, different types of sex work, and if they are force-fed substances to keep them compliant or to keep them addicted as a way of accruing that debt. All right, oh my goodness. So now we're going to conclude today's section with resources, or today's session with resources for victim and survivor assistance and what we can do to help if you ever need it. So a little bit about us. So ACT Alberta is a frontline service agency that helps victims and survivors of human trafficking on their pathway to safety. So since 2008, we've been the only agency in Alberta that is inclusive to all types and experiences of human trafficking, including working with men, women, trans and gender diverse folks, undocumented persons, foreign nationals, LGBTQ+ populations, people with disabilities, sex workers, really anybody except for children and youth under the age of 18. Because this is legislated under the Protection of Sexually Exploited Children's Act and handled mostly by Child and Family Services. At this time, we have offices in Edmonton and Calgary, but projects managed by us run throughout the entire province, including specific ones in rural and remote and Indigenous communities, so that we can best serve traditionally underserved areas. So our vision is an Alberta free of human trafficking, and we aim to do that by supporting and advocating for victims and survivors of human trafficking, increasing knowledge and awareness of all forms of human trafficking, and leading and fostering collective action through collaboration and respect. And we aim to do that by, principally we operate from a person-centered model driven by human rights, one that meets people where they're at and helps them get to where they want to be. We are committed to serving and empowering all individuals using an anti-oppressive framework. We offer evidence-based and judgment-free services through a lens of intersectionality. And lastly, we build collective action through the coordination, collaboration, and respect of all stakeholders and allies. So there are so many great people and partners throughout the entire social services sector, and we have to work together, and we need to work together to provide this comprehensive wraparound care, because we can't do this on our own. We are all part of the solution. So currently we offer 3 programs. So under prevention, we have First Defense, which is free tailored training and education for community response, basically what we're doing here. We run a community-based We run a community-based victim services unit through our Pathways to Safety program, which offers specialized case management to victims and survivors. And then we build collective action through our It Takes a Village program, which focuses on knowledge sharing, research, and partnerships. And just to highlight that, sorry, we changed too fast. And just to highlight that Pathways to Safety program, that direct victim response. So once an individual is identified and connects with ACT Alberta, so we accept all types of referrals from service providers, from law enforcement, from hospitals, from communities, from families and loved ones, to self-referrals. Then we conduct an intake and a needs assessment to see if they fit our mandate, and if not, we'll refer to more appropriate services. Then we will work on those needs at the client's lead and direction. Some of the things that we can help with are safety planning, housing and shelter, basic needs like food and clothing, immigration regularization, counseling and therapy, criminal justice guidance and court support, healthcare and addictions, transportation and relocation, employment and income assistance, language and translation, and really anything else the person needs. That's what we're here for. And then we continue to support them and for however long they need. Our services don't have an end date, so people can stay with ACT for however long they need, but we also try to build resilience and empowerment, so hopefully one day they can walk on their own. Okay, so essentially we want to help someone to get from exit to recovery and care, and empowering them to thrive. So from victim to survivor to thriver. So finally, we answer the question, what now? In reality, it's unlikely that you'll cross paths with a trafficking situation, immediately identify it as such and know what to do, or feel comfortable intervening. Although this might sound less impactful, the most consistent and effective way that you can help interrupt human trafficking is to be an advocate for members of our community who experience additional vulnerabilities. By being an alert citizen who supports advocacy work, inclusive and non-oppressive policy, and who listens to stories from peers from maybe different backgrounds, but we're there, we support them, that we can create a network that can leave others less isolated and less vulnerable to trafficking. And thankfully, that means that this group today has already been fighting for fighting human trafficking. So when you fight for equity and dignity, you make a difference. So thank you for making our communities better and safer. And then just lastly, if you see any red flags and you get that feeling of suspicion, you're not alone. So we can help discern if it is trafficking or not, or talk you through a referral. But so we're a 9 to 5, Monday to Friday agency. So if it's a situation that requires immediate attention or is outside of those hours, there's the Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline. They are multilingual, confidential, offer trauma-informed supports 24/7, so they're a great resource. I do have some of their cards out front. Always recommend people take them. And they can refer to service providers, including us. So if you want to refer to us but you don't remember our number, you can refer to them and they'll refer to us. And then another possible option is just to talk to another authority figure, which could include, say, like airport personnel, a staff member of your organization or a staff member of an organization they frequent, or one of your own who you know is trained. It's possible that traffickers and their victims might be particularly wary of law enforcement. So we do try to handle that with as much care as possible. But we are working on training basically every first responder in the province. So hopefully we'll have a supportive trauma-informed network in the future. Though if you have a concern for someone who is visibly under the age of 18, I would recommend definitely calling law enforcement and/or Child and Family Services, as this requires very special and particular care. All right, so with that, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to learn about human trafficking in Alberta and how you as community members and perhaps service providers can be a part of the solution. So I'm going to open the floor to questions, but if you have any and you don't get to ask your question, you can email me later. My cards are out front as well.